Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Brilliant. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to check with Sophie. What's the attendance like, Sophie? We can give it a few minutes if we're expecting more participants.
We've about 30 on. At the minute we're expecting about 50.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, maybe give it another minute or two.
Okay, and just to note for people that are on, the session is actually being recorded and it will be shared via gov.ie afterwards for those that can't attend. But yeah, we'll give it a few more minutes. Thanks, Sophie. I might kick off, Sophie. It's almost 40 there now, so I presume the remaining participants will join us in the next few minutes, likely. But just conscious of people's time, and we've a little bit to get through. So we're going to start with a presentation. And again, I'll just let people know the session is being recorded for those that have joined in the last minute or two, and it will be made available on gov.ie just for your information. So yeah, this morning's presentation is just going to provide a brief overview of the Connected Hubs call, and then it's going to allow for time for questions and answers at the end, or rather after the presentation. So we want to allow for as much time as possible for your questions. We're going to ask that you submit your questions through the chat facility, and that's really to facilitate us translating them into an FAQ document. So Sophie will be looking after that. I'm just going to share my screen now, bear with me. Can you see my screen there? The presentation? Okay, thanks, Laura.
Presentation, maybe.
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to introduce myself. So I'm Geraldine Crean. I joined the unit last September. I would have replaced, you would have known potentially Thurlock O'Brien, so I would have replaced Thurlock O'Brien in the role within the unit. So one of my responsibilities is to oversee the Connected Hubs call, and the team that I'm working with, and I've included the name of the team here, or the names of the members of the team. So Laura, Sophie and Stephen would work alongside me. So first point to note is we're a relatively small team, and we're administering and managing the Connected Hubs 2022 call. So I've also included the Connected Hubs mailbox because with leave requirements and so on, we want to make sure that all queries are answered. So we would ask that all queries, even if you do want to direct them to a particular person, you can call that out in the email, but do send the email to connectedhubs@drcd.gov.ie. And that's for your own sake so that we can ensure it is answered. So then just to say that, again, given that it's the second year of the call, people are familiar with the Connected Hubs call and what it's about. So the presentation is going to give a brief overview of this year's fund. It'll focus on the overall aim of the fund, and it'll look at the key timelines associated with this year's call and the key changes compared to the 2021 fund. I'm also going to zone in on the match funding and the voluntary labour requirements, because from the queries received throughout the year into excuse me, into our mailbox, we have received queries on match funding and voluntary labour requirements. So I just want to touch on that. I also want to look at the funding categories, and then the application appendices packages for the Connected Hubs 2022 call are new. Basically, it's a different way of looking for the total cost breakdown. So I will run through them very quickly as well. And then after the presentation, which I'm hoping to run through quite quickly to allow as much time as possible for your questions, we'll have the Q&A session. And as I said, that'll be facilitated through the chat facility. So we would ask that you just insert your question into the chat facility and we can take them in order they're received. So the main objective of the fund, so it's a 5 million fund. It is, and I'm quoting from the scheme outline here, it's to develop and leverage the capacity and the quality of the existing remote working facilities and BCPs. But just to give a bit of logic to that, with the return to the office in the coming weeks, and we know it's already began, and with the commencement of the National Connected Hubs marketing campaign, we'd expect to see the occupancy figures rise in the hubs throughout the country. And obviously, there needs to be a way to make sure that there is the capacity there to accommodate remote workers via the national hub network. And hence, we need to add to the existing capacity and develop the hubs as per that requirement. There's a note in there, the same as last year, TNV and RRDF are the appropriate funds to apply for the building of new hubs. So that's the building of new hubs is not appropriate for Connected Hubs 2022. So that's nothing new, but it's just a point to note. On the key timelines, so the call for funding proposals was announced, as you'll be aware, last Monday. The closing date for expressions of interest is this coming Friday, and to date, Sophie told me this morning, we've received over 80 expression of interests. And just to bear in mind, the EOIs are to allow us to manage resources and manage the application process. So we would ask that if you do intend to submit an application, do submit your expression of interest before this coming Friday. Then the closing date for submitting applications is the 4th of April. So that's Monday, the 4th of April. We've put in a timeline here where we're asking the queries that you might have on completing the application package are received or submitted rather before Friday the 25th of March. And this is to allow us process applications from the 28th of April onwards, or 28th of March onwards rather. So basically we're asking you to submit any queries you might have a week prior to the application submission deadline. And again, we're a small team. What has happened in the past is we do get an influx of queries on the last few days, and it's not manageable, and we want to get back to people on time in advance of the deadline. So again, just to make a note of that deadline there. And I suppose all of this, we're aiming, I've said Q2 here, 2022, in terms of the funding announcement. We really want to get that funding announcement out as early as possible. And the whole team, like the entire unit, will be working on the applications received, and we'll be aiming to get the funding announcement out in early Q2. So the end of April, early May, if at all possible. And again, this will be dependent on the number of applications received. But obviously we want to give you as the hub users as much time as possible to complete your projects, because the requirement is that they're complete by the 11th of November this year. So then looking at the key changes compared to last year's call, we have a new qualifying condition, and that's around last year's project. So obviously last year was the first year of the call, where the applicant's Connected Hubs 2021 project isn't complete. And this is unless the department has granted an exemption, the proposal will fail to qualify. So you do need to have your 2021 project complete in advance of submitting a proposal, because otherwise it won't qualify when we're reviewing them. And again, there's an exception in there. We are saying that if you have liaised with the department and if we have granted an exemption based on your circumstances, then that does not apply. But it is an important one to note for those that haven't yet finished. VAT inclusive exclusive, and this is the VAT requirement for this year. So we're specifically providing that, and this is to protect against the risk of double funding. The default position for the 2022 call is that costs included in an application will be considered exclusive of VAT unless a letter from revenue is provided. So basically, for the 2022 call, we're presuming that everybody is VAT registered and that you can claim your VAT back from revenue. If that's not the case, you need to submit a letter from revenue where they state that you're not VAT registered with your application, and include in your application VAT inclusive costs so that you can claim the VAT from Connected Hubs. But if you are VAT registered, we'd say don't include the VAT costs and claim them back from revenue. And then there's a change in the multi-hub applications. So the table provides the change. Okay, the single hub remains the same. It's 10,000 to 75,000. The multi-hub, there's a minimum of 3 hubs requirement there. So you need to have 3 hubs within your multi-hub application, and a maximum of 5. So there was no maximum last year, but there is a maximum this year of 5 hubs that can be included in a multi-hub application. And in the hub categories, so we have, it's more or less in line with last year's scheme, but they are renamed, and I think it's clearer this year. So we have the commercial or for-profit hub, and that's almost self-explanatory, but it is outlined in the scheme outline, and there is footnotes included. And then we have a social enterprise or not-for-profit hub. So the social enterprise is, and there's a definition there included in the scheme outline. It's a social enterprise is an enterprise whose objective is to achieve a social, societal, or environmental impact rather than maximizing profit for its owners or shareholders. And we've specifically called out in the scheme outline that the majority of BCPs would be considered social enterprises for the purpose of this call. The table basically outlines the match funding requirements in the case of commercial or for-profit hub, there's a 10% match funding requirement of the total project cost. And in the case of commercial or for-profit hubs, that needs to be provided, or 10% match funding cash contribution needs to be provided. Then for the social enterprise or the not-for-profit hub, there's also a 10% match funding requirement, but there's a minimum of 5% cash contribution required for social enterprise or not-for-profit hub. And I've included a column there on how that should be completed or where it needs to be completed on the application form. And that's via Appendix B1 or B2. So it's basically the Excel file and in one of the appendices, depending on the type of hub that you are. The community dividend. So this is where commercial or for-profit hubs, it only applies to commercial or for-profit hubs, first of all, and it's where 25% of the approved grant is provided via a community dividend over 3 years. And an example of that is provided in the scheme outline, or what that might entail. And again, I've called out that that's actually provided via Form 1 or Form 2. It's not in the appendices, it's not linked to the total project cost, it's a community dividend separate to the total project cost. Voluntary labour, and voluntary labour for the 2022 call is permitted. So it's up to a maximum of 5% of the cost of a line item. The maximum rate allowed is €14 per hour, and it's provided via Appendix A, and that's the breakdown of the line item, so you can say where you're including voluntary labour if it's appropriate. And it's also the sum total of the voluntary labour per hub is also required in Appendix B1 or B2, depending on which hub you are. And again, I'll come to the appendices later so you can see an example of where that will apply. Funding categories, these are broadly in line with last year's call. We did send out a request for suggestions in terms of what might work, or if there was anything that was new that could work. And to call out one that came in, the podcast and creative studios is one that came back from a number of different hubs or BCPs as a suggestion. Other than that, everything is made more general. So I suppose sustainability, green elements, we've left it quite broad so that each individual hub can think about what they need and, add the necessary line items within whichever category works best. And it's important to point out as well that these are just suggestions. We're not limiting hubs to these categories. So if there is another category, we've actually added other in there so that if you don't fit into these categories, do feel free to add items or cost items if it's relevant to your project. And I do just want to highlight as well, because I know in the suggestions request, we did receive suggestions that from a current expenditure point of view. And as we're a capital funding, we can't support current costs, but we are aware that there is an issue there in terms of sustainability. And most of you might be aware already that we are working with our colleagues in the WDC on a connected hub strategy. And we're going to begin in that very shortly. Like, conversations have already started. So it's not something that we're ignoring. We are looking at the sustainability of the hubs from a current expenditure perspective. And just to note as well, in terms of the project management costs, similar to last year, there's 10% of the total project costs permitted for project management, and that still applies. Slightly relevant to some of the suggestions where current funding is an issue. And these are the application appendices that I referred to, and you may not have had a chance to look at these yet. So basically we have Form 1 and we have Form 2, same as last year. Form 1 is for a single hub application and Form 2 is for a multi-hub application. We've also added in Appendix A and Appendix B1 or B2. So Appendix A is specifically to break down your total project cost by line item. And now this isn't a great screen, but if you open up the file yourselves, there is a column here for voluntary labour. So that's what I meant when I said it's by line item. So for example, and I think we do have an example up there on gov.ie of how you might fill this in. So if you had, for example, you were renovating a room as line item 1, It would first of all come under the relevant category, but then if you did have somebody that was willing to give up their time to paint that room, and it was valued at X amount, and the maximum being 14 per hour, but that can be allocated to that line item under the voluntary labour, and the associated costs can be included. And then when you're filling out Appendix 1, so Appendix A is filled out for both single hub and multi-hub applications. The only difference for multi-hub applications is that you might have multiple hub names. But other than that, it's filled out in the same way. Then for when you come to Appendix B1 or B2, this will depend on whether you're a single hub or a multi-hub applicant. And in this case, you'll fill this out. And again, the difference, and I've called this out on this slide. So each single site within a multi-hub application will need to complete either B1 or B2. So a multi-hub application basically could have, for example, a social enterprise within its application, and it could also have a commercial or not-for-profit, or it could have a number of them types. And then obviously each single hub application will be one or the other, and that will need to be included with the Form 1 in a single hub application. Yeah, so that's really the main points that I felt should be highlighted, but I'll open the floor to questions. I'll stop sharing my screen so that I can see the chat facility. So if you want to put in questions into the chat, if you have any questions. And we would ask that you put the questions into the chat purely just to be able to manage Sophie is going to be managing the FAQs. So if you do have a question, if you could put it into the chat facility. Okay, so Elaine has a question. Can a local authority submit more than one multi-hub application if there are more than 5 BCPs in a county interested in coming together? Yes, you can, Elaine. There's no limit on the number of applications that can be submitted. There's a limit on the number of hubs that can be included. Where do we submit our interest? Sophie, I might just get you to come in there.
So we're asking everyone to submit their expressions of interest by this Friday, close of business, to the Connected Hubs mailbox. I'll put the email address in the chat now for everyone, so you can just send them to there.
Thanks, Sophie. Then the Glasshouse, is the fund open to hubs in Dublin 18, for example? Yeah, it's open to all hubs. So any hub is open to apply. Trevor, you've asked, Trevor Murray, you can access the application form on gov.ie, Trevor. Sophie, you might just put up the link to the application forms as well, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, that's in there now.
Thanks, Sophie. Do you have to have an application in 2021 to apply for this year's expression of interest? No, you don't. You can apply for this year's fund without having applied for last year. But do submit your expression of interest. It's good for planning resources. Is there a preference for multi over single? Paddy Buggy has asked that question. Paddy, there isn't a preference. What we'd say is if there's a way of achieving economies of scale, we'd suggest and we'd recommend submitting a multi-hub application, but there isn't a preference. The option is there to submit a single hub. Like for example, if there's a number of hubs joined up in one area, it might be better value for money to submit a multi-hub one, and as opposed to the single hub application. Malachy, you've asked, last year Mayo County Council were part of deciding on single hub versus multi-hub. Is this the case for 2022? Don't understand the question there, Malachy, so I might just ask you to clarify that one.
Yeah, it's just we were part of last year's application, and we got some direction from Mayo County Council to say, it might make more sense to go in as a multi-hub as opposed to a single hub. So part of the decision making was including the Mayo County Council awareness of the broader picture, I suppose, of the bigger picture, and possibly the economies of scale. So,
Are you with Mayo County Council, Malachy, or where are you coming from?
we're a regional group that put in an application last year, but tagged with Mayo County Council as being part of the process, if you like.
Okay, so were you included in Mayo County Council's application?
Yes.
Okay, so I know Mayo would have received funding, so you'd have received funding under the multi-hub application.
Correct.
Okay.
So just wondering, is that the case this year, or has it changed to the degree of deciding on single hubs versus multi hubs?
No, you'd be, the option is there to submit an application in your own right.
Okay.
If you wanted to discuss it with Mayo, but the option is there to submit an application. I
suppose
know that Elaine has submitted a question there or had submitted a question there in terms of the number of applications. So I suppose there is a limit on the number of hubs within a multi-hub application. So if, for example, Mayo had 5 and you're the 6th, you know, there's no option there, only to submit a single hub application really. So depending on, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Agnes has asked the question, will the funding be provided in the same manner as last year? If approved, it moves into the bank account. It's similar to last year, Agnes, to answer your question. So there would be 80% would be paid on successful award, and then the 20% balance would be paid on completion of the project. That 20% balance can be paid once. It's not necessarily a set date. As soon as a project is complete, we would make the monies available. So, and that project completion report will be made available early on, and basically can be completed by the project applicant at any time. And Ashleen has asked, and again, Sophie, you might be able to answer this one. I submitted my MEOI this morning. I didn't get an auto response. Will we get confirmation after the 4th? I'm not sure that we have set up an auto response for that, Ashleen.
Yeah, no, we haven't. But you should get a response by the end of today.
No problem. Thanks, Sophie.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, Ashley. Equally applied across a multi-hub application. Yeah, there's a limit to this to 75, a maximum of 75 per hub. So it does have to be applied equally across a multi-hub application. And Colette at the Glasshouse, is a detailed spec required for the expression of interest at this stage? No, we just look for an expression of interest. I think there's a guidance there, but am I correct to say, Sophie, it's more or less a one-liner that we want? We just want to know that you intend to apply for numbers more than anything.
Yeah, that's all it is. Yeah.
Okay. Can you clarify what complete by the 11th of November means? Is it monies paid and work complete? Did I ask you to come in on that, Laura? Laura's going to be managing the compliance side of it.
Hi, everyone. So just to clarify on this, and that goes back to the previous question into when the money was going to be allocated. So Astral did say 80% of the fund will be allocated when you've been told you've been successful to the fund. So we'll be requiring your bank detail. Obviously, we'll be getting 80% of the money then. To get the remaining 20%, you will be required to complete completion project report, which will demonstrate that your project is finished, and then you will be allocated the 20% then. And this project completion report will need to be submitted before the 11th. So, and then it kind of gives us a bigger wiggle room to issue the money before the end of the year. So that's this project completion report that needs to be submitted by then.
Okay, thanks, Laura. And then Urban has asked, can hubs successfully included in 2021 applications be included in 2022 applications? Yes, provided they're complete, Urban, they can. Can an existing hub involved in developing multiple satellite locations submit a multi-hub application? Yes, Porrick, they can. And again, it's the proposal needs to include the remote working plan for the hub and what's in place at the moment. So your question doesn't give a description, nor do I need one, but basically that's, you'll know from the scheme outline that what the aim of the fund is. The fact that it's involved in developing multiple satellite locations. Once the single sites that you're including in the multi-hub have that remote working element, you're open to submit a multi-hub application. And I see Liam has, do you want to give a shout out there, Liam, to the event you're talking about there, if you want to take the floor?
My sound might be great, Geraldine. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, Liam, yeah.
Yes, well, very quickly, we have a Hubs Expo on Friday week, which is basically to bringing in suppliers, providers who cater to the hub market or the hub sector. So there'll be breakout rooms, each supplier or provider will have their own breakout room, and those who may be applying for the fund. Our hubs are not applying for the fund as well, but want to see what services and stuff is out there. Can move from room to room, basically. There's no need to pre-book. It'll be like our usual Friday event in terms of the Zoom link in. But what we do need now is to get you to notify people who have provided services or goods to you before to register for the hub. So that's register for the expo. That's what's in the chat, is the link for the providers and suppliers to register for the expo. And the more of them we get, the better expo we have. So and the overall purpose is to help you shop around about what's out there, talk to people who provide the services, etc. So yeah, that's on Friday week.
Okay, Liam.
And anybody here can attend that. If you're not on our mailing list for our usual Friday network meetup, just email me at liamhoran@wdc.ie and I'll add you to the list.
Okay, thanks, Liam. So that's during the fortnightly meetup of the Connected Hub members, but anybody can register.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
we're dedicating the entire meetup next Friday week to this expo, basically. And if it overruns beyond the usual hour, we let it overrun, because people will be going from room to room talking to providers, etc. So
Yeah, I was going to ask. Yeah, you'd need the full hour. Yeah, it's a great idea.
and we go to 2 hours if necessary. We leave it open as long as people are meeting people.
Okay.
So people can come in and do a half an hour.
We might
go to a few
attend,
rooms,
Liam,
go
actually.
and go again. Please do, yeah, please do. We'll
Yeah.
actually give you a breakout room then as well, so that people go to you as well.
Yeah, even just to get visibility on the types of things that are needed. Yeah, okay, thanks, Liam. And then through Digital Hub, if the hub is in the process of being built, are we still able to apply for funding as long as it's completed before the 11th of November? You might get in touch with us directly. New bills, like we'd have to look at the current network. I don't have the name, Brew Digital Hub, but we might speak afterwards on that. It is existing hubs, so we'd need to maybe a bit more detail. Then Geraldine Keohan, does the project have to be completed and work paid for by the hub before they receive the grant money, or does receipts of payment need to be submitted before grant drawdown? I might just ask Laura to come in there.
Yeah. So the 80% I said is going to be provided upfront. In order for you to receive the 20%, you will have to provide us with expenditure summary, basically. So the remaining piece of your project will have to be covered by yourself, and then we'll give you the money afterwards once the whole project has been completed, and that will be detailed in your funding agreement. But yeah, that's the way it's going to work. So you get the 80% upfront, and then you get the remaining tranche of your funding after the entire work has been completed.
Okay, thanks, Laura. And then Chad in the class says, for the 2021 application, what confirms that you are complete prior to applying for 2022? Again, I'll pass over to Laura.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm going to jump on this. So like for all the people that received full funding last year and that the project are completed, there is a small last piece of compliance that needs to be completed. I'm currently working on this, so you can be expected to receive communication from myself very shortly, which will basically be a very short report to complete and a summary expenditure to be returned to myself, confirming that all the funding has been spent and that your project has been entirely completed. So I know that last year, in order to receive your last payment, you confirmed that you would be completed by the end of the year. Now I'm going to come to you to make sure that you have indeed completed your project. So there'll be a small compliance report to fill in and to return to the department. So I'm very conscious that you're also concentrating on a new application. I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible so you're not overburdened with paperwork, but that will have to be completed. I'll give you, hopefully that can be done quickly with a short turnaround, but that will have to be submitted before your new application if you intend to apply for this year again.
Thanks, Laura. And then Danielle, you've asked, would this cover expansion of the BCP connection to cover more of the property and to set up a proper hub with computers? I presume you're not speaking there about the actual Wi-Fi connection that you're speaking about, the infrastructure, Danielle. And again, it would come back to, like, in 2021 we did cover renovation works, and the key thing is that it's complete by the 11th of November. So in the application, the timelines would need to show very clearly that it will be all works will be complete by the 11th of November. And also the remote working plan, the element of that within the BCP. Connor has asked, with voluntary labour, it may be unknown at the time of application what that may be. How would that be accounted for after the application may be submitted? I have to come back to you on that, Connor. Even if you did, would you have any idea in terms of the voluntary labour that might apply at application stage? I'll come back to Connor separately on that. But we would need to see the voluntary labour and the breakdown because it's relevant to obviously the grant that will be awarded. So we ideally need to see that in the application. Mary received funding in 2019. Sorry, we received funding in 2020 and 2021, and this is coming in from Mary. And the application drawdown process is extremely easy, and you are walked through every step. If you've received any funding from your local council or leader, it's a very similar process. Okay, thanks, Mary. It's a comment more than anything, I think, there. Paddy is looking for me to explain the de minimis rule with regard to this funding. Okay, so we are governed by de minimis. So that basically means that in 3 years, you can't exceed the €200,000 limit. And that includes the Connected Hubs funding that you're applying for. So basically, if you received 200,000, including the Connected Hubs funding that you are applying for this year, then you're over the de minimis limit. If I'm not answering your questions, do come back. Actually, if what I'm saying isn't answering your question for you. Liam Cronin, can you confirm is the 10% cost towards project management separate from the 10% for promotional and marketing campaigns? Yes, it is. And then you've asked, is the 10% program management cost for grant administration within the hub? It's specifically for your Connected Hubs project. And Liam. And Elaine is asking for us to explain the types of areas that can be funded. Okay, so it isn't a scheme outline, and there's a list of 14 areas. They're quite general So I would suggest looking at the scheme outline. I can pull up the slide again, Elaine, bear with me. Again, I don't know if you can see that or not, but basically there's the expansion of existing infrastructure or facilities. And again, I'm going to repeat myself here, but it is the timeline needs to show that it will complete on time. Conversion of existing space, installation of privacy booths, installation of building or door access control and security systems. And we have a footnote in there. And actually, I don't have the footnote included on my slide, but it basically is to improve the security of the hub facility, and the exact footnote will be in the scheme outline. Then we've disability access upgrades, we've podcasts and creative studios, and that came back, as I said, into suggestions from the different groups. We've sustainability and green elements, and again, it's left quite open because depending on the hub, the requirements will be different, as is the same with the other categories. Upgrade of external signage, IT, network infrastructure, and there's a footnote there, basically anything that will secure, expand or improve access to the internet at that site is covered in that category. Innovation measures against COVID-19 related challenges, and that could cover a wide variety of line items there. And then promotion and marketing campaigns to raise awareness of improvements made to drive increased hub usage. But again, they are on the scheme outline. Paddy has asked, on the de minimis rule, is it 3 years from when funding was granted as opposed to when drawdown of funds took place? Okay, so de minimis applies to application as opposed to payment. So it's at application stage or granted stage in the case of your question, Paddy. So just to be clear, it's relevant to any monies that you were awarded in the 3-year period. So Jordan has asked, can you clarify please the 10% match contribution? Does the hub provide 10% of the funding? So it's 10% of the, and let me just double check my slide here. It's 10% of the total project cost that's required. It's required there, Geraldine. Yes. The hub must provide that, and it's for commercial hubs. There's a 10% cash contribution, so that's the matched funding. The maximum or the requirement is satisfied there through the cash contribution. For social enterprises or not-for-profit hubs, there's a requirement for 5% cash contribution, a minimum of 5% cash contribution. So there is a balance of 5% to be included on top of that. Would installation of a lift to an old building be eligible? We'd really need to see the full application, Aisling. I couldn't answer that question without seeing the full proposal. But to my knowledge, sorry, someone's coming in there. Maybe it was an accident. Okay, so to my knowledge, lifts have been awarded funding under the 2021 call. But again, we'd need to see the full application.
Okay, thanks, Erlyn.
No problem, Aisling. Would website enhancements to enable meeting room bookings and integrate with accounting package, for example, be a funding category? I see that. I'm thinking it's a function of the Connected Hubs network in terms of meeting room bookings. But you're obviously referring to your own website in the Glasshouse. Let me come back to you on that, Chad. I'd need to look at it in more detail. Okay, so Connor's asked in relation to VAT. I know you ran through this already, but if you are registered for VAT, you do not include this in the costs and claim as normal through revenue. Okay, so if you're registered for VAT, exactly, you don't include it in the costs. So when you're submitting your application, you're submitting it you're submitting the costs exclusive of VAT. So you're not including VAT costs in your application. The only time you're including VAT costs in your application is if you have a letter from Revenue that confirms that you're not VAT registered. And in that case, we would pay your VAT costs. But to avoid double funding, in the case where people are VAT registered, they can claim from Revenue, obviously. So we need to avoid the double funding risk. And hence, we're going to presume that everybody is VAT registered unless they have that letter from Revenue with their application. And in that case, do include your VAT costs in your application, and we'd be paying you the grant VAT inclusive. Do we need to provide 3 to 5 supplier quotes per line item? Depends on the cost of the line item, Aisling, and
Okay, but you up to 5 usually it's 3, and then up to 10 it's or 5 quotes or something like that. We need to provide a number of supplier quotes, don't we, like last year?
yeah, it's in line with the national and EU procurement guidelines. That would be how the connected hubs requirements would work. So yeah, there is a requirement for 5, depending on the cost, and it depends on if it's goods or services or works. But
Have you
Equity
further
has
information on that, Geraldine? Maybe a link that we could you could share with us to see the
Yeah,
information.
we had a call with another group recently, and we will try and do up maybe a 1-pager in terms of procurement and issue it out.
Thanks, Geraldine.
Okay, thanks, Ashley.
I would add as well, Geraldine, if I can, that even if it's not included in your application, if you don't put the 3 or 5 quote that you might have got, this is something that you will be required to keep on file anyway for audit purposes. So whatever tender process or quote queries that you're going through, just make sure you keep everything on file.
Perfect.
Thanks, Laura. There's no other questions there, but if anybody has anything else, feel free to add it in. We've allocated the hours, the information session, so we have 10 minutes left.
Sorry, Anya here. I asked a question, but I'm not sure I put it correctly or I got the answer I was looking for. But if we have a hub and we're supporting multiple satellite hubs as part of a multi-hub application, does the funding have to be amortized evenly across all the hubs, or could you just maybe
It can't
explain how that
exceed
might
70.
work?
Sorry, Anya.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
It can't exceed 75,000 per hub. So there's a maximum funding of 250, and that applies to the maximum of 5 hubs in a multi-hub application. But it's not to say that 220 could be allocated to one hub. There's a limit of 75,000 per hub.
Per hub, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Does
but
that answer the question?
yeah, but yes, but it can be a different amount per hub, obviously, in terms of, but it can exceed that amount.
Exactly. It can be a lesser amount, but
Yeah,
it can't exceed 75. Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks, Shirley.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I might draw it to a close if there's no more questions.
Sorry, there's just one more question that just popped up in the chat there about the procurement process. Joe is asking, is the procurement process required to be completed before submitting an application or post-approval is successful? So what I would say, and Jill will correct me if I'm wrong, is that regardless of your status now, the one date you need to keep in mind is the 11th of November, that your project needs to be completed by this, and your application needs to demonstrate that that it will be completed. So if you don't have a procurement process yet, it's fine, as long as you can show us that the entire project will be done on time.
Yeah, I'd agree there, Laura. Obviously, if you can do as much as possible in advance and submit with the application, you know, it's good, but obviously it's not a requirement because there may be a cost there in terms of procuring. So we wouldn't expect somebody to incur a cost without the funding being awarded. But obviously, if the application can show as much as possible the timeline that you expect to complete the project in, including procurement, then it's a positive. I think there was another question actually below Joe's as well. Connor asked, with de minimis and as VAT was included in last year's call, is that VAT amount considered for de minimis? I will have to come back on that, but we'll include that one in the FAQ, Connor. I'll have to double check. It's prone to change, so I just want to be sure I'm giving you the right answer. So basically the question is if de minimis is VAT inclusive or not, and de minimis is separate to what we're doing with VAT. So I'll check that out and it'll be in the FAQs. Where could we find more information on the VAT rules for the application? The VAT rules are different from last year. Yeah, so they're in the scheme outline, Aisling.
Great.
They're in the scheme outline. And I can run through it. There's a bit of time, as you said there, like really, like we're presuming you're VAT registered.
Yeah.
So we're presuming that everyone is registered for VAT unless they include a letter from revenue to say they're not.
Okay.
As an example, maybe some community groups may not be. So,
Okay.
but in the instance where you are VAT registered and the default position, I suppose, this year, you'd be including your costs without VAT. And
Okay.
we'd be paying you the grant on your VAT exclusive costs. And that way you'd be
Okay.
claiming your VAT costs via revenue because you are VAT registered and that option is
Okay.
available.
As opposed to last year, Geraldine, it was VAT inclusive, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, I wasn't
Oh,
involved.
sorry. Yeah, I'm just, it is different from last year. I think it was
Yeah,
VAT.
the onus was left, I think, on the applicant last year in terms of the double funding requirement. And I suppose it's just
Yeah.
to mitigate the risk as much as possible
Okay.
for the 2022 call.
Perfect. Thanks, Geraldine.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, David is asking. There is a requirement to complete the survey, and that's in our scheme outline, David. But we'll look at that once the scheme closes or the call closes. And I might just draw to a close if there's nothing else. Thanks everybody for your time. And as I said, the session will be available online as will the FAQs. Sophie will be doing that up for you now and it should be available shortly. So thanks a million.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Geraldine.